Terence "Bud" Crawford is one of my favorite fighters right now. His ability to find counters is beyond brilliant. And his switch hitting is reminiscent of Marvin Hagler. I'm excited for his fight against Canelo. However, this is a major step up for him, in more ways than one. So it's worth asking the question, does Crawford possess the tools to take down Canelo Álvarez? Well, let's take a look, and I'll let you know my opinion at the end. I mentioned that Crawford has brilliant counters. However, he's way more hittable the first several rounds as he gathers info to figure out what counters will work for him. While this risk has always paid off in the past, this might be something he can ill afford to do against Canelo. It's probably a bad idea to eat Canelo's left hook, even if that means he gets the information needed to counter that left hook. Knowing what counter will work doesn't really matter if you're already on the canvas. And if he takes a more cautious approach, that just gives Canelo more time to batter at his guard. Even if Crawford makes use of his stellar blocks, he's dealing with a powerhouse who likes to beat on opponents' arms and shoulders until they're bruised and battered enough for cracks to start showing. Eventually, the whole foundation could crumble. However, Crawford does have the ability to parry and deflect very well, which can be incredibly tiring for an opponent as their shots are thrown off and they need to rebalance themselves after each punch. With Canelo's power though, Crawford would need to use near perfect execution and deal with each shot individually. Taking a look at Crawford's guard as he's punching, he's remained defensively responsible throughout his career. While jabbing, he tends to prioritize the side of his head to guard against hooks. So, if he eats anything clean, it will likely be a jab. Canelo does have an impressive record of successfully countering jabs with multiple kinds of power shots. So, to deal with Canelo's hooks, prioritizing covering the right side of his jaw and temple is probably a good choice for Crawford. There's little to be done about defending his left side while extending his jab. But Crawford will of course be on the lookout for right-hand counters from Canelo. If he is surprised by a counter, it will likely be an uppercut that connects up the middle, where he's still vulnerable. During power punching, Crawford's guarding hand is on point too, exempting his crosses where he tends to lower his rear arm to extend the reach of the punch, counterbalance, etc. He's usually offline enough with his foot position to stay safe. But with Canelo's explosiveness, this could become a major liability if Crawford tries to get away with this tactic as per usual. To be very clear, I think Crawford is sometimes choosing to lower his guard to gain other things in return. It's a big pet peeve of mine when so-called analysts try to feel smart by criticizing the techniques and tactics of pound-for-pound greats from their mother's basement, while not understanding why the fighter is making an intentional adjustment or taking a certain risk in the moment. Crawford knows this is technically wrong. He's choosing to do it to gain other advantages. So rather than his cross, I think the big problem for Crawford will be the same as for the rest of Canelo's opponents, in that he'll have to choose whether to defend his body or head by raising or lowering his guard while defending and while punching. He does have the reflexes to guess right most of the time, but we'll have to see exactly how accurate he is on the night. Also worth mentioning, since Crawford is a switch hitter, standing southpaw could help to block some pathways and inhibit Canelo's left hook. But Crawford will be more open to rear hand strikes. Now I think that Crawford's stance switching could be a potential boon for him. Like most fighters who weave and pivot, Canelo is vulnerable to high tempo combinations. He would prefer that Bud throws big, telegraphed strikes at him so he has time to read them, then duck under or pull away, coming back with a counter. So if Crawford throws a fast-paced, high-tempo, long combination at Canelo, then Canelo could get himself out of position like he did multiple times against Bivol. And Crawford's stance switching could potentially make this much easier. The issue is that good positioning can often depend on the ability to hold your ground. Bud's fancy footwork could become meaningless if Canelo has the strength to simply muscle himself and Crawford back to the center of the ring. What could help Crawford with Canelo's physicality is that he's a fantastic wrestler, and he could combine that wrestling with dirty boxing. That being said, Canelo's pretty strong, so maybe this could only go so far. We'll have to see. A good tactic for Crawford could be to manage the ring through his stellar jab, which comes from a variety of paths, and directions. He does have the reach advantage and a brilliant jab from both stances after all.
It was a good shot. Really was more of a jab.
It was a jab,
hard.
but did you see his legs buckle?
Another thing that could really prove beneficial for Crawford is that he's far more a body snatcher than a headhunter. Canelo definitely prefers opponents going after his head so that he can draw and counter. No one is better at Bud at adjusting his foot and head position to get inside of his opponent's punches. But this does leave the side of his head that he's currently punching with very open, a risk he might not be able to afford against Álvarez. Hooks aside, a surprise uppercut or even body shot could really cripple Bud here. But if Bud does manage to land some punishing body blows, if he can do that and out-wrestle Canelo and start to pile up counters and get Canelo out of position to land high-volume combinations, then even after all that, he would have to do enough damage to at least shut down Canelo's offense. And since Canelo has taken multiple power punches from none other than Triple G and remained steady on his feet every time, Crawford really has his work cut out for him here. So, do I think he can win? Yes, I do. But it would have to be the best performance of his career, and one of the worst performances of Canelo's career. Canelo is still masterful, but he has slowed down lately, and no one can deny Crawford's domination of multiple excellent fighters. There are a lot of factors for and against all those statements I just made, and I'm sure we'll see some great debates in the comments. I don't like to predict fights, because even looking at every single element of each fighter's style, you never know exactly what iteration of that style will show up on the night. But I can predict one thing for sure. Whatever happens, everyone will act like they called it, and that the outcome was inevitable and predictable all along. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.